speaking of foreign horror movies, next we go with, I believe this movie's from New Zealand, a movie called The Ugly from 1997. Sort of like a psychological horror flick in which this psychologist woman wants to try to understand this one serial killer who's spent, I think, the last 6 years in an asylum. So she goes to interview him a few times, sort of learns his life story, and we see events from his life happen, and it might sound like a somewhat I don't know, maybe cliche movie, but I think it for especially for a budget, the movie cannot have that high of a budget. I thought it was actually really creative the way they sort of went about the flashbacks and how they integrated events from just maybe 6 years ago to like 15 years ago. I thought it was actually quite memorable. I have seen this one once before, but much like Silent Hill, it's been quite a long time. So I did remember that much about it coming in, but I definitely think it was a movie that was not amazing, and there might be some comprehensive issues about the end, but for the most part, I definitely think it's a movie that is decent.
Yeah, I've seen this one quite a few times. I've had the DVD in my collection ever since, well, pretty much ever since, I don't know, 2002, 2003, somewhere around there. And I enjoy it quite a bit. I think it's a good movie. I have pretty much the same feelings. Like I say, I kind of like the way they go about the flashbacks. I think I wouldn't call it humor that's thrown. I mean, there's kind of just very brief moments here and there, like some of the things where these orderly guys are fucking around with him.
The guys were complete dicks.
Yeah, like even just that one bit where he's making like the wheelchair noise with his
oh god,
with his stick there. Just little moments like that which kind of might make you smirk or something. It's not necessarily meant. I mean, it kind of is and isn't meant to be funny at times, but yeah, there's a few of those moments throughout. Especially like towards the end, kind of where everything is coming together, and I mean, there's this one scene which I thought was fairly emotional, where he's and it's right towards the end where he's talking about how each time these things happen, it gets harder and harder to kind of resist, and I thought the acting at that moment was pretty good. I kind of felt the character's struggles on that kind of emotional level. I definitely appreciated that part. It is a bit of a weird movie as well, a bit of an oddball movie. I don't think there's a whole lot of other movies out there that you could say has a similar feel to this one. So I think it also it is a little unique in its own way as well.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons, at least for me, because the movie comes from New Zealand, it's not like it's a country that's, at least from this movie, it's not like all that different, but just the sort of like the asylum. It did seem like a real asylum. We saw one other patient, the two orderlies and the main doctor, and that's literally all we saw. It seemed, and I know I'm sure some of that's budgeting and casting things, but the movie seems somewhat surreal at times. And there's like a whole thing with a lot of the blood being pretty dark, if not black, which I think some people have complained about. I don't really see the big issue, but it's just moments that just come across as more surreal. And even in like the flashbacks, I think a lot of even TV shows do it now, but showing like the characters talking in the flashbacks while the events are happening, it's unique. And I, much like you, I can't think of many other things that are like this. I do think the movie, I wouldn't say falls apart, but I do think the last, let's say, maybe 10 minutes aren't as great. I did enjoy, like, I guess, the final portion of his confession with the woman psychologist, but like once she leaves and goes back home, I didn't care as much about what happened afterward. Especially because I don't really get Um, the whole thing with the doctor and the other patient. I have no idea if, like, was there a thing? I don't know.
Well, the doctor's just as weird as some of the patients.
Yeah. That doctor I thought was a really interesting, really interesting character. I mean, he even looked like he looked so oddball, and we didn't really learn that much about him. Though I have heard there are little things in the movie that you can, like, maybe if you see it a lot of times you can look out for, and things that just stand out, which might give the movie some more depth. I'm not sure if any of that's intentional or just because this was, I think, this one of this guy's first movies, so it could just be like inaccurate mistakes. But even so, there's just some even small things in this movie that gave it a really interesting feeling, and it's not one that I think is easy to forget. I was going to ask you, have you seen, at least to your knowledge, have you seen many other horror movies from New Zealand?
Yeah. I mean, off the top of my head, I can't rattle off a list or anything, but I mean, New Zealand is sometimes connected with Australia, so I mean, some people will consider New Zealand movies to be Australian movies, vice versa. So I know Australians in general are pretty familiar with New Zealand, or New Zealand movies, or New Zealanders in general. So, I mean, even I mean, you know, I watch a lot of basketball. Even the Australian Basketball League here has a team from New Zealand in it. So, yeah, we are pretty close. So I do see a bunch of New Zealand movies here and there, but I mean, there's a couple that I do really enjoy. I don't think they're necessarily horror movies. So in terms of horror movies, I'd have to see a list and then rattle off which ones I have seen.
Out of interest, and this doesn't necessarily relate to this movie, but when you're watching a movie from New Zealand, can you tell it's not Australian?
It really depends on who's in it. Like this particular movie, I would say no. Like this movie actually feels like it. I mean, if no one told me that it was from New Zealand, I would struggle to know if it's New Zealand or an Australian movie, to be honest. I know there's some people out there probably from New Zealand saying, no, this is definitely a New Zealand type movie, but...
Well, there's a lot of movies I can watch here, and you know, there might be Canadian movies, I just assume they're American. Because you can't tell much difference.
I mean, there's some other movies where it has, like, Islander people in it, you know, Maori type people in it, and those specifically, you could say, okay, this is definitely a New Zealand movie, but it was just random white people from New Zealand in it. I can't tell the difference all that clearly.
Actually, I'm sorry, I do have one more thing. I forget what the character's name was. Maybe Julie. It was the girl who was the who tried to be friends with a kid. The guy serial killer when he was a kid, and who sort of popped up later in the movie. I thought she was a pretty interesting character. I sort of liked, you know, one of the more emotional scenes was when she was trying to connect with the kid, and you know, the mother, who has to be one of the worst mothers I've seen in a movie. Like, that, talk about an abusive mother. I just laugh at, this your father wrote that he says he hates you and that's why he left us. Yeah. It's probably not what he said.
Well, just while you bring up the topic of the mother, it did remind me of one specific shot in the movie that really stands out to me. The one where he's walking back home and he sees his mother in the doorway. It's got this like red light behind her. I don't know. It's just the way that particular shot popped out. I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for a movie that seemingly doesn't have that high of a budget, that scene in particular was like really good. Like. And I mean, talk about an unlikable character in the mother. I mean, honestly, I have a hard time when when somebody has such a a lifestyle growing up under that type of thing. I have a really hard time hating somebody who has to go through something like that and comes out messed up. I mean, how else are they going to come out? So it just, I mean, in many ways, despite the guy being a serial killer, he's a decently sympathetic guy in my opinion. And the actor who plays him, which is a name I can't necessarily pronounce, but Rotondo. He I don't know the guy, but he did a really good job in his role.
Yeah, he did win some sort of award for Best Actor. I don't know what other movies he was up against or what other performances he was up against, but he did win an award for this movie, I believe.
Yeah, I can certainly see why. So, like I said, I've seen this movie quite some time ago, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed seeing it again. I don't think it's an amazing movie. And like I said, I think the conclusion's a bit iffy. But there's still quite a bit to like about this movie, just going through the life of this messed up kid. And there's some emotional scenes thrown in, there's some sort of surrealistic stuff going on. So I'm going to give this movie a 7.5.
I was like, jeez.
I know. So 7.5, and much like Faces, I'll probably round this down to a 7. I think the movie is pretty good, and I would definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it. It might be a little different, but even for the budget, I think it's probably worth seeing.
Yeah, I'm going with an 8 out of 10. I really enjoy it. Having such a sympathetic character who's also technically a bad guy, he's a bad guy in one way, and you can look at him in a totally different light in another. But yeah, I just like that, the emotional touch to his character. And I mean, there's one scene where a guy gets scared by a coat rack, so who can't be...
I like how that sticks out to you.
Yeah, who can't be happy with a scene like that? Anyways, yeah, I really enjoyed that one, so 8 out of 10, I like it.